All right, hello everyone. My name is Teresa Chan, and I am the Assistant Dean for the Program for Faculty Development here at McMaster's Faculty of Health Science. I'm delighted to have a crew with me today that is diverse and awesome, and we have obviously our participants as well, but the panel of discussants today is from nearby and also very far, and so I'd like to introduce them all in turn. First is my colleague here who's assistant dean in his own right and with his own portfolio, Dr. John Sherbino. He is the guy that taught me the concept of multiple wins, which he sometimes regrets. But I'll have him, he'll be speaking to us about kind of the concept and telling us a little bit about it. Next we have Dr. Michael Gottlieb, who's much published in his own right and has worked on a paper with myself and Jonathan about the multiple wins concept. We'll be sharing with that in the website, and maybe at some point we'll put the link to it as well in the chat box. So we'll be talking about kind of his approach and his perspective on that as well. And the last and awesomest person, I guess, of the panel, because she's all dressed up for us, and I don't put on makeup, and I don't know if Mike and Jonathan have very subtle makeup if they have any on. But Sree, you look awesome tonight. Thank you so much for joining us. Sree is coming in from Duke, and Mike actually is coming in from Rush University. So I'm really excited to have you all join me on this webinar tonight, and thank you so much. And without further ado, I'm going to actually start us off by having a good conversation about what that concept of multiple wins is, and putting it in the context a little bit around the idea of academic scholarship and where we go from that. I think for most of us in our institutions, there is some need to contribute to the scholarly work. And so Ernest Boyer had written in his report many years ago the idea of different kinds of scholarship. And I think that today we're going to cycle through different kinds of scholarship and definitely talk a little bit about how we can generate some multiple wins on that front. I'm going to ask him to maybe give us an overview of the idea of what multiple wins mean.
Thank you, Teresa, for this invitation. And let's be honest, if you know Teresa and Mike, you know that if they ask you to do something, you do it because you're scared of them. And they will probably have accomplished it before you even finish the email. And the opportunity to do something with Sree was just the icing on the cake. So I'm really pleased to be sharing some ideas. I don't think I have all the ideas, but I do know that there's something common amongst us as clinician educators, is that it's not as if we have free time. And if you were going to tell me you have free time right now, you're lying, and maybe you're lying to yourself a little bit. But we're also really emerging as a very valuable phenotype in academic medicine. An individual who can bridge those two camps, the camps of the clinicians who have a prime directive to ensure high quality patient care, and then the academics who are working in a theoretical, sometimes isolated from the direct immediate clinical needs, in trying to design what's the best way to design our educational programs, whether it's for the undergraduate, the graduate, or even in the continuing professional development stream. And understanding those two spheres is where a clinician educator can stand in both sides, grounded in theory, but also understanding the true applications of everyday challenges of healthcare practice. And so as someone who runs an education research unit, but also does full-time clinical shifts in an emergency department and trauma center, I had that unique perspective. So if you are valued to the system, but you don't have enough time, then I think it's incumbent upon you as you develop your arc as a clinician educator to find those efficiencies. And I use kind of a decision framework every time I say yes, because it means I need to say no to something else. Too frequently, the easy default is you say no to your health, or you say no to your family, or you say no to the other things outside of medicine. And you can continue to do that because there's no satiating academic medicine. There's always one more thing to do. So my decision framework looks something like this. I need to say yes to two of the elements before I could say yes to the project. In one element, in one corner of the triangle is what I call my job. It's what I get remunerated for, and it's how I make sure that I have an ability to support myself and my family. In the other corner or the other angle, I call that my value, or things that allow me to get professional growth. And these could be things like learning something new, or networking, or developing a mentoring relationship where someone will mentor me. So in somehow or in some manner, this project is going to give value to me. It's going to allow me to grow and to become a better version of myself. And then the third part, the third angle of this kind of this pyramid, or this triangle, is the importance of the topic. And this is the idea of a cause or an opportunity to really support something that's meaningful. And so I'm always trying to say, can this project to which I'm going about say yes, does it answer two of those three things? Is it my job? Am I getting paid for it? Is it an expectation? Is it part of my employment? But that's not enough to take on something new if it's an additional to some of my core competencies. And so the next question I ask is this something I really believe in? Is it something that has high value to me that I really want to see move forward? So for me, some of the areas of my own scholarship and research reflect just my own take and my own personal view of the world and how we should work on things. So I try to find things aligned to that. Or is it an opportunity for growth? Am I going to learn something? Am I going to develop a new skill or an ability? Am I going to get networked with somebody? So if I can say two of those things yes, then that is the minimum threshold to say yes. So that when I am completing that project, it's not that I'm just doing one more little thing to my overwhelming stack of things. I'm finding that it's delivering to me in two of those three areas on which I make that decision matrix. And so really what we're trying to think about is, can we improve efficiency? And I'm going to probably stop in a second because I don't want to get too much of a monologue and I can really get onto this. But really what you're looking for is, in your life, what is there that you can eliminate that's redundant? What's there that you can automate? And with technology and with resources that you may have as a clinician or as an academic clinician, there's lots of resources that may come into play. And what's there that you can delegate? And so if you can figure out how to eliminate, automate, or delegate, then that frees up bandwidth for you to take on those projects that you want to hit two of those threes: remuneration, growth, or value. And when you're choosing something that does multiple things like that, then you are seeing a return on your time, a return on your intellectual capacity that's really worth it. We'll get into the nitty-gritty of how to actually make those multiple wins from a single project, about how you have to be intentional early on. But when I think about it from a kind of an abstract way, I'm thinking about, okay, to my busy life, is there something that's going to be so meaningful to me that I'm not only going to serve a project that I believe in, that I have high value, that I think really serves society or my patients, and will I also get something out of it personally? A new network, someone who's going to mentor me, maybe learn some new skill set. I can't say yes to that. It's hard for me to take it on.
Great, thank you so much. I am going to ask Mike to now take kind of the spotlight and chat a little bit about kind of like making that multiple win actually happen. And so Jonathan's talked a little bit about the framing, about why it's important. And I know there are some people in the audience that aren't clinician educators. Maybe you are someone who's a teaching faculty. Maybe you are someone who is a research faculty as primary. But let's be honest, it's not just the clinicians who are busy. Everyone's busy these days, right? At least I know that I've been on Zoom for about 8 hours so far. So, you know, like the marathon meetings with no downtime between, like we're all busy. And so the question is, how can we make things count multiple times? So a trick actually tonight, we were very efficient. Mike and Sree and I run a faculty incubator program. That's kind of my conflict of interest here. I do get a small teaching stipend sometimes to show up to events for this program, as do Sree and Mike. And so when we were brainstorming ways that we could actually make things count twice, we wanted to do a webinar for that series, but we actually thought, hey, why don't we link forces, and I can host something here at McMaster and bring Jonathan in as someone who's also been a part of that faculty incubator in the past to talk about both purposes. And so it's a 2-for-1. And so to me, this is the spirit, in the spirit of that multiple win. Now, I'm sure Mike is going to tell me that we should also write a blog post and a paper out of it, but I'll let him kind of speak for himself maybe.
So again, thank you for having me on this. Always tough to follow Jonathan Sherbino with some of the amazing wisdom he laid out. I think just reiterating the idea of opportunity cost is really important to be conscious of. I often think about opportunity cost in terms of, oh, it's one project or another, but there's so many things that exist within there, and just being conscious that, you know, even if you don't necessarily see the trade-off, there's always a trade-off. It might be a downstream project. It might be just time to relax, time to exercise, time with family. There's always an opportunity cost of something you're doing, and being just conscious of that whenever we say yes. That said, let's talk about how to maybe operationalize this. Now, there was 4 main kind of points I wanted to leave with this. The first one is, how do you maximize the work you're currently doing? Next, when you have a project idea, how can you be most efficient with that project idea? Once you have a successful project, how do you extrapolate that into multiple wins? And then finally, how do you come up with future projects? So let's start off with the work that we're currently doing. So all of us are doing things that could probably count for various forms of scholarship. Teresa alluded back earlier to the idea of Boyer's categorizations of scholarship, and not all scholarship is giant randomized controlled trials. Scholarship exists in many different formats. And so being conscious of that, there's a lot of things that we are currently doing that we could easily repurpose. The lecture you're giving, for example, in your local medical school or your GME environment could be repurposed for a national lecture. It could be repurposed for a blog post. It could be carried forward into multiple different venues. By the same token, a lot of us are having to probably create things de novo. And that's part of, as Jonathan mentioned, part of that triangle is part of it's our job. So sometimes we're doing things that are existing already in our job that we can then convert into scholarship. I guess a little background music, but yeah, we can take some things we're already doing and convert them into scholarship. And then we have to be conscious of this. So not every project that we do needs to be a peer-reviewed publication. Some of them just don't necessarily qualify for that. And if you try to do that with every single thing you do, you're probably going to utilize all your time with that, and you're not going to have time to devote for either more interesting things you're involved in or the opportunity to think and come up with a grander project. So not everything we need to do needs to be scholarship, but some of it probably can be. And I think just reflecting on that before you launch your next endeavor. So if you're creating a curriculum, which with COVID, most of us are doing some form of curricular changes, pause and say, okay, is this something that could theoretically be studied and publishable? Is this innovative? Is this different? And if so, plan for that at the outset. So if you're planning to go ahead and publish, or you're thinking this might be publishable, before you jump into it, pause, okay, what are the outcomes I want? If I'm going to use, for example, Kirkpatrick grade levels, what Kirkpatrick levels do I want to hit? Am I looking at just attitudinal? Do I want to push beyond there? And it's much easier to consider that at the outset. So just considering the things you're doing, many of them may be publishable, may be forms of scholarship. And if you pause before you launch into them, it's a good chance to reflect and make sure we're following Kern's or another curricular development model. But also it gives us an opportunity to plan ahead and come up with a much better strategic plan for having outcomes we can measure and publish. Now, once you're actually going to do a project, this is one of the things that's helped me out a lot, is that as I'm writing up my IRB, I'm coming up with the project idea, I am simultaneously writing up the paper. And so as you're going through it, for example, our background search that you're doing to inform your IRB, to inform your project, to ensure that it's sufficiently unique, you put all that work into it. Why not just write the introduction at that time? Because you know the literature probably better than you ever will. And one of the challenges is if you try to go back and do this later, after the project is done, you're now going back when you've lost the momentum, right? Everyone at the start of a project is always so excited. Everyone's like really committed. You can put 5 meetings together and everyone's fine with it. And near the end of the project, everyone's kind of tired and they're just trying to get the project done, right? Our momentum, our energy, our enthusiasm, our excitement about that project drops near the end. It always does. And we have this time in the beginning where they're the most excited. So we should really utilize that enthusiasm and try to get the introduction written out while we're writing it. And then we think about the methods. Well, the methods is basically what you're going to do. So that's your IRB proposal. Again, you can run those simultaneously. The result is pretty easy because most of it is just data reporting. So there's not a lot more beyond just kind of writing effectively. I like to write out my tables. I think that's usually the most helpful because it helps me visualize out what data I want to collect. And then the discussion, you can generally predict based on your hypothesis. Sometimes you're wrong, but usually we have a pretty good idea what to expect. And so I've actually written out my discussion before, so that by the time I get my results back, if something differs, I can always change a little bit of my discussion. But I'm utilizing a lot of that background I did from my introduction to feed into the discussion. And then when the project's actually done, I do it as a plug and play, and I can just throw the data straight in and move forward. And so that's one of the other things I found really helpful, is just as you're writing up your IRB, as you're coming up with a study, just write out the paper at that time. And it's much easier than trying to come back, repeat your literature search, and do all the effort again a year later when you're less excited about it and you have way more other time commitments. The third one is to be conscious of, once you have a project, how do I carry it forward? So once I have a project, what's my next project? Sometimes we get stuck in this habit of, and I know I've personally been guilty of this, is coming up with a really great idea, being excited about it, doing a project, and then stopping and moving on to another completely different project. And I put all this effort into coming up with this idea, put all this effort into searching the literature. And I now know this topic very, very well, and better than I will 6 months or a year from now. But I don't utilize that momentum. I don't utilize the effort. I jump onto a completely different topic versus taking something that you already put this time into, converting into the next study. It might be looking at your study and finding your limitations and deciding, I'm going to now address my limitation with another study. It may be converting it into a lecture. It may be converting it into a blog post. It may be converting it into a podcast. It's much easier to do a podcast than something you've spent a lot of time reading into than to start one de novo. So there's a lot of opportunities. You can take something that you've already done and convert it into the next series of scholarship. And I think all of us have done this in different capacities, and we'll probably talk through some examples a little bit later. The last one, and this is one of the things we talk about in the paper that Teresa mentioned, is just being conscious that we have our local environment at our shops. And, you know, medicine in general is a really huge field, and there's all these people around the world that have really great ideas, and inevitably there are people that have similar interests to you. The odds that someone with a very similar interest to you that's interested in collaborating that will be at your shop is usually pretty low unless you selectively sought them out. But the odds that you'll find someone with very similar interests, you know, via Twitter, via some form of social media, becomes a much broader network. You can reach out and connect with other people. And what this allows is you can now share the ideas, which means you can share idea formation. So it's not all incumbent upon you to come up with every single idea. You can now utilize multiple people to develop ideas together. And this is something that I found, you know, has been incredibly valuable for my career, is just coming up with ideas as a group and talking it through. And most of my collaborators are, you know, all throughout North America, including obviously Canada, and all around the world, really, in places that I would not have gotten to just by random chance geographically. This is by having a little bit broader of a network using this virtual medium. So you can share ideas across that. You can share multi-site collaborations much easier. And then it doesn't all fall on your shoulders when you're really busy. You can develop teams that will iterate off each other and come up with the next project and the next project and the next project. And so that way you can continue to utilize that momentum we talked about and not keep reinventing the wheel. So those are kind of my initial 4 that I wanted to hit off the bat. And I'll kind of pass it back to Teresa to talk about the next steps.
Right, excellent. So thank you so much. I am actually going to now invite Dr. Natesan to talk about her perspective on making scholarship work for her as through her junior career. So she's a little bit further on now. She's no longer junior. I know she looks like she's like super young, but she has some experience, and wanted to have her reflect on that experience, kind of reflect with us a little bit about how to make this happen, because it's not always obvious. And I think there's even a question right here that I might start it off with, but how do you actually find out that gut sense of whether something could be scholarly? Because Conwell has asked that question, and it's a good question, because as a junior faculty, like, what can be scholarship?
I have to give a shout out to John, Michael, and Mike and Teresa, because they've really been great mentors for me, and as I'm still learning this process. But a lot of it is, you know, really being not setting limitations for yourself about the possibilities of a project. I think if you're able to really think about what your passion is and kind of look into the literature about, you know, what actually exists within that scope of practice, it can really help you to really decide, you know, can this be made into scholarship or not. I think the humbling part about, you know, being junior transitioning to not so junior faculty is, you know, as a new faculty member, you really want to make a name for yourself. And in that way, you have a lot of mentors that will jump in and ask you to be part of their projects, for example. And while we want to say yes to everything, I'm going to echo what my colleagues have said. There's still only 24 hours in the day, and ideally you'd like to see your family or sleep or maybe eat something. So if you say yes to everything, you will inevitably say no to quite a few things, as well as sometimes you can get sidetracked away from your own passion and the area that you're interested in. Now, while I think early in your career, it is helpful to say yes to a lot of things. It can help you to build skills that you may not otherwise have, such as skills in collaboration, skills in writing, literature search, creating a project, even research. If you say yes to too many things, what tends to happen is that you start to feel like you're letting people down, you miss deadlines, you can't inevitably do everything that you want to do. So I think the first thing that I would say as a junior faculty is, you know, think about what you're passionate about. And if you had to plan out your career or area that you were going to be, you know, the content experts for, what would that actually be? So that was the first thing that has actually helped me is, you know, saying medical education is a great thing, but like for me, I'm very interested in feedback and clinical teaching and how can we bridge that. So once you know your area of interest, then it makes it easier to say yes to projects that actually align with that. So that while you're saying yes to things, it actually is still building yourself and bringing value to the work that you're doing. So that would be the kind of the first step I would say as a junior faculty is finding your passion. The second part is being very deliberate in what you're saying yes to. So, for example, if this is a project that gives you a lot of networking and mentorship, but it's not in that area of interest, it still may be valuable to say yes to that to gain those skills. But just be mindful that as you're picking up new projects, you do eventually want to let go of some of the old ones. And I really like what Mike does is that he kind of staggers his projects. So as one project is ending, that's when he's picking up another one, so that you don't have all your deadlines all in the same like 1 to 2 weeks, which I think we could all say does happen quite a bit of time, but we try to avoid that as much as possible. So if you're able to kind of stagger your deadlines and projects, that can really, really help you to stay on track. But as far as thinking of what you can make into scholarship, I think you have to be thinking a little bit outside of the box. You know, so it doesn't have to be, you know, this randomized controlled trial that you're doing as your first thing as a junior faculty, right? Instead, you can start off with other things such as, for example, if you're giving a lecture to your residents, you know, how can you actually use that and maybe make it into a podcast or a blog post, or even as a submission to like a medical assembly like court. So there's different ways that you can be creative, or even that curriculum that you developed for that teaching opportunity for the medical students or residents. Maybe you can publish that onto MedEd portal, which is peer reviewed, and that still counts as a publication. So you don't have to be like, you know, aiming for like Annals of Emergency Medicine and all of these things. You can actually still have scholarship and have it look a different way, but still bring a lot of value and opportunity for people. So, so that might answer some of that question about, you know, where to start. I think is really looking for different avenues for scholarship and how you can actually speak to that. And kind of the last thing I would probably bring up as a junior faculty, I think mentorship is probably has been the most key thing in my own career that has really helped me to grow as a person and actually as an educator as well. So building your network of friends and colleagues that you can lean on is really helpful, especially when you're thinking about picking up projects. It is nice to have a sounding board that you can ask them, you know, does this align with what I should be doing? Or this seems like a great opportunity to get involved, and they can actually help you, or you still owe me part of our project. Sorry, Mike, I'll get that to you. So it's really important to know when to say yes or no to things, and having a great mentorship can really help you to kind of learn the ropes of scholarship, and it can really help you to eventually pass down those same skills that you've learned to junior learners later on. And I think that's truly what's helped me to now take the lead in different projects that have been successful, as the skills I've learned from like everyone in the faculty incubator that has really laid that foundation and helped me learn that confidence so that I can do scholarship and not be so afraid of even the word research or scholarship, but actually like kind of attack it and say, okay, I think I can actually do this. And if I don't know what I'm doing, I still have great mentors that I can ask for help as well. So those are kind of the take-home points that I would say as a junior faculty that can help you at least get on the road to scholarship.